Well, my personal view about At the Board in 1979, looking at the heading, the title, is relating to the poet's feelings about what happened at a particular time in her life, where she had to move from a place of birth, Iran, to move to Iran because there was problems in that particular country at the time.
So she's sort of a refugee, isn't she? And then, but this poem is about, you know, the day they get to return home, and I think it's really interesting that it's from her point of view as a child at that point in 1979, and that she stands there with all of the adults, and they're all really excited, aren't they, about returning home, about coming back.
It does say she was 5 years old, so it seems to be a lot of confusion as well, where people are rushing in the first stanza. We grabbed a drink, it suggests a sense of urgency to get back to the homeland because they've been away from it for such a long time.
But then just like a child that's really innocent, she just comes out with these statements like, the autumn soil continued on the other side, it rained on both sides of the chain, the same chain of mountains encompassed all of us. So she's saying, well, you know, I can't see the difference. I don't really understand what the big fuss is about, why people are making such a big deal about where they live and why just, you know, a particular piece of land is so important to them.
Also, she uses reported speech as well when she mentions a sister in stanza 3, and my sister put her leg across it, look over here, she said to us. She makes it quite humorous because from a child's perspective, it is a humorous account of what's going on, and therefore she's unaware of the enormity of what's happening between these two countries and moving from one place to another, which at this moment in time doesn't really mean anything to her.
So with that in mind, what do you think the main message of the poem is?
Well, in this poem it uses the word chain several times, and the word chain is used to show the division between one country and another country, Iraq and Iran, where this man-made division is being made, which the poet at this moment in time as a child doesn't mean anything to her, but it's to do with, in my personal view, it's to do with homeland and to do with being able to feel secure in where you are. And the last stanza, the same chain of mountains encompasses all. It's about having family ties. When the chain before was using a negative way, the chain here is using a positive way, where family ties hold you together rather than a division, they're brought together. In stanza 4, it's mentioned using the words much cleaner, more beautiful, much kinder, because they've moved back to the homeland. And the mother says this. Again, it suggests that it could be possibly exaggerated, and I'm not sure whether Hardi believes this, that it is actually a much nicer place, because she doesn't know, being a child, that this place that she's come back to is exactly what the mother's saying, as the mother said. And also, near the very end, in the final stanza, a man bent down and kissed the muddy homeland. Again, it's exaggerated. So from a child's point of view, I don't think she really can believe exactly what's going on and take these comments by people or their actions by people as being honest, maybe because it's exaggerated that they've gone back to the homeland.
I mean, she uses words, I mean, she repeats the word same quite a lot within the poem, same or both, to indicate that she really can't see the difference. I think for me a particularly interesting line is the speech that she reports from somebody, I can inhale home. And you know, that's a very poetic phrase to say, I can inhale home, I feel that I'm breathing, you know, where I belong. But then what she's talking about is the mud and the soil and the rain. So you've got that combination of obviously the adults that feel incredibly patriotic and proud to be returning home at last, contrasted with this very almost quite a negative but honest at the same time description by the poet Hardi.
I think as well the fact that she's heard from the mother that it's much cleaner and beautiful and kind, and then she refers to it at the end as the muddy homeland. It's quite a stark contrast, that's kind of similar to what you were saying there.
And the theme of the chain that runs all the way through, and obviously the chain, as we said before, the division that it represents, but it's quite an interesting division that it is just a thick iron chain. that in itself, you know, the child can defeat it. The child can just stand on one side of it, and the response that gets from the border guards is interesting, that they are told off. You know, it's almost like, well, even the guards don't really believe in this barrier, this border.
I think as well, taking it from Hardi's point of view, that this chain, that divides the two countries, she's more or less saying they're both the same. So by exaggerating, the mother exaggerating, as well as the person at the end kissing the ground, it doesn't quite fit in with her views about this particular place. That in Iraq, it is as bad as what in Iran, it's as bad as what people were saying. So therefore, it's two different places, but obviously they are used to a particular place in Iraq, which is their homeland.
How do you think the refugees are treated by the guards? What clues do we get about that?
In the checking point, it's
Okay. mentioned,
checking point in the first stanza, and it's also mentioned further down as well. And it's like they are not welcome. It's as if they are, a guard is there and they're not allowed entry unless they've got specifics in order to allow them in this particular country. So therefore it makes them feel, I would presume, alienated, but coming back into their own country.
I mean, it must be quite unpleasant to be in a country and have to carry papers with you all the time, and to have those checked. You know, we waited while our papers were checked, our faces thoroughly inspected. And I think, you know, we're very lucky in this country to have freedom of movement within this country and throughout Europe. So sometimes it's difficult to understand what it must be like to live in a country where you are treated automatically like you've done something wrong, like you're a criminal.
How do you think the poem has been structured then?
Well, all the stanzas are of different lengths, maybe to suggest a train of thought, where it shows as well confusion with what's happening, with her parents all rushing to the border to get into this country, Iraq, and therefore it highlights the confusion and adds to the language that's being used as well.
I mean, it's a narrative poem, isn't it? And I think the title is very interesting for indicating that, because she's got the date. And it's quite, from her point of view again, it's quite a factual recollection. So she talks about when it was, she talks about her age. I think perhaps the only thing that she doesn't mention is specifically where it is. And, you know, we know that it's in the mountains and, you know, the countryside, but that's about it.
It kind of reflects her childhood, because at 5 years old, are you really that aware of what country you're in and that kind of thing?
So it's quite concrete in a way, it's a very concrete poem.
She uses as well a very conversational style as well, very easy to understand, obviously from a child's point of view, of the events that happen, and she breaks everything down very easily, so the reader can understand what's going on.
So I suppose that's why it doesn't have the rhyme that we might find in other poems, because she's recreating that point of view of the child.
Yeah. And I also notice in the second stanza, where it's got run on lines, the line under our feet continued, divided by the thick iron chain. Again, this chain is significant in this poem, that runs throughout this poem.
So we've got the enjambment in stanza 2, which is very short, but she does it later on, doesn't she? If we look at the second to last stanza, the autumn soil continued on the other side with the same colour, the same texture. So it's almost like there's a division in the sentence, so it's split across two lines, like there's this artificial division in the landscape.
Well, it's emphasising as well the message in the poem where a society is divided, maybe her identity is divided, where she's moved from one place to another and she's not quite sure where she stands. Maybe that's the reason why she's used that.
Yes, and it sort of introduces a sort of dramatic or ironic twist. The lad continued on the other side with the same colour. You almost expected it to be a different place, because they talked about how the roads are much cleaner, the landscape is more beautiful, people are much kinder, but then she notes, well, it's the same colour, the same texture.
So even from a child's point of view, that she seems to have a much more clearer understanding than the adults, where they seem to be living in this world, this fictional world, where they thought that it was a perfect place that they came from, when actual fact it might have not been that.
I read some quite interesting points today, and for my own personal response to this poem, I kind of see that it's it is about conflict, but it's also, for me, about the clarity of thought of a child, where this child has sort of a more realistic view of the world than perhaps an adult does, because of all these prejudices and sort of expectations that adults create for themselves, which a child doesn't necessarily have. So, really.
Well, I totally agree with you as well. From my point of view, my personal response to this point is where the child feels, from the adult point of view, the poet, where she's in an identity crisis as well, where she doesn't feel that she's part of both countries, and also showing the conflict, where the confusion, where she's had to move from Iraq to Iran, and the inner turmoil that she's had to go through, and not sure where she belongs.
I mean, I think it's got this very definite date, so it's about a very definite and real experience, and I think that's quite important, and will help a lot of people sort of relate to this poem, that it is about a moment of sort of change in her life. I worry though sometimes when you read something that's taken place so, quite some time ago, whether our world has actually moved forward and changed, and I worry that still in a lot of these countries we still find a lot of kind of prejudice and a lot of division. There are a lot of refugees, and I think this poem perhaps helps us to understand that experience of refugees. They don't want to be living in a foreign country. They don't want to be living away from their homes and their families. What they want to do is return home. And I think sometimes perhaps we as a society are not as sympathetic as we could be to those unfortunate people that we should really be trying to help.
I think the last line of this poem sums it up: the same chain of mountains encompass us all, where she's trying to put us all together as one, rather than being this divide.
So the border guards and her family and
the chain and everything, she wants to discard that, and we should live as one happy family, and therefore the chain is that links us together, irrelevant of what culture you come from. For society to move on and become more friendly and more understanding with each other, we need to set our prejudice aside and work together.
Well, obviously for the exam we have to find comparisons between poems, so what poems would you relate to this one?
I think I'd perhaps start off by looking at the fact that it's a description of a place and a particular time. So because it's of a place, I suppose we could compare it to the yellow palm, in the way that the yellow palm presents a country that appears to, I think it's Baghdad, appears to be very happy, but when you explore it beneath the surface, there's a lot of division and there's a lot of suffering. If we were going to compare it to another place that's described, of course we've got Mammoth's Wood, that describes a very particular place. Belfast Confetti is a good description of place.
I would compare it to the flag, which the flag is considered to certain people to do with the patriotic values and their nationality, and therefore it shows divisions of what people feel about a particular place, where that clearly shows in this poem how they feel about Iraq and Iran.
So that idea of national identity, maybe national identity causing conflict, and how we've got the elements of conflict through the border guards and their treatment of the refugees at the border, to even something extreme like Mammoth's Wood, where you have the conflict that's described that has injured soldiers.
Also, you compare it as well to the right word, because it's the right word, where in this poem it's like analysing or trying to come to a particular agreement about how we should name people. We're at the border, the poet Hardi is not quite sure whether the right words or word is being used to describe Iraq, which she's come back to.
So it's the sort of, both poems are about finding some truth, aren't they? About finding the reality of the situation. So in the right word, it's, who is this person that she sees? Can she find the truth of it? And at the border, you're looking at the truth of what the older adults have to say, and what her sister and her recognise in the country.